Yeah, Naveen, so we have 140 people inside and more people are joining. You can start.
Good afternoon, people. Welcome to the next webinar of TiE Mumbai. It's really a pleasure for us to have heavy stalwarts today join us for the session. I've got the privilege to introduce to you my president, Mr. Atul Nishar. Atul Bhai, as he's fondly called, is the founder and chairman of Hexaware Technology currently. He's also the founder and chairman of Ascent Overseas Education. He's also the founder and chairman of his family investment office, TechPro Ventures, which have been investing in interesting companies over the last few years in India and overseas. He's also been the past chairman of NASSCOM, India's leading lobby body for the software and services companies. Over to you, Atul Bhai. You're in charge now.
Thanks, Naveen. So we have today a very, very interesting session. Ask me anything. Not too many people like to accept that role of ask me anything. Normally, all speakers prefer to have one topic to speak on, but today there is no such barrier. And before I introduce Anjali, let me say that even before today's session has begun, we had received 250 questions, and we'll keep receiving as she speaks. So we'll try and see that she is able to respond to as many questions as possible. We have grouped also the questions so that they can be addressed in a common manner. So now let me briefly introduce Anjali. She is the founder of Avana Capital and chairperson of Investment Council of Niti Aayog FinTech and Women Entrepreneurship Platform. And as the founder of Avana Capital, the platform that invests and supports scaling up of startups, she backs exceptional entrepreneurs who leverage innovation to solve large problems and catalyze impact while generating good returns. She has been investor in a number of well-known startups: Delivery, Urban Clap, Darwin Box, Coverbox, LoanTap, Make My Trip, Nykaa, Safari, Fraternity, and Lenscraft. I hope her list will include companies of some of you as well in future. She was appointed as non-executive chairman, a very prestigious role of Dena Bank, a PSU, at the time of merger with Bank of Baroda. She has been partner and managing director with TPG Growth and for India, Southeast Asia, Africa, and Middle East. She has been global partner and CEO of Spencer Stuart. She has been a consultant at McKinsey, a strategy consultant both in New York and in India. After her bachelor's in computer engineering from Gujarat University and master's in international finance and business from Columbia University. So please join me in welcoming Anjali Bansal. So first of all, thanks Anjali for joining us. That's very nice of you to spend your time and also be willing to answer any question. So I would suggest that if you can initially give a brief introduction of some of your thoughts in today's time, and then I can start with the questions.
Thank you so much, Atul. And thank you as well as TiE for having me over today. This is actually genuinely a pleasure and a privilege. And I was sharing with my team earlier that I have seldom been more nervous about a session, because not only am I following in some very large footsteps here, but there are a lot of friends and all professional colleagues on this call, I'm sure. I've been a charter member of TiE now for close to 20 years. Big believer in entrepreneurship and always in awe of what TiE actually accomplishes, both in India and around the world. So what an interesting, difficult time we are in right now. And who would have even imagined in January, even though we knew something was happening in China, and I also sit on the boards of some large companies, and we were worried about our supply chains and making sure that supply is secure. But who could have possibly thought that we will be sitting in week 5, getting close to week 6 of a complete lockdown, not just in India, but around the world. So situations like COVID-19, and this is a very specific health crisis, so to speak, but it has turned into a large humanitarian issue, societal issue, economic issue, and ultimately will have a very profound impact on how we think about how we live, how we work, and how we consume. And while there is a part of me that just wishes that, this is nature showing us that we can shut down, the air is clearer, it's less noisy, we are consuming less, our carbon footprint is so much better. I do know that once this lifts, and whenever it lifts, it will not take us too long to actually go right back to traveling, to consuming, and not necessarily being very sustainable. But here is where I think there are some positive outcomes. And we will talk a little bit about the big human crisis that is coming out of this right now. But some of the positive outcomes that I have seen over the last few weeks. One is a absolutely rapid, dramatic acceleration in digitalization. And I would not just quote unquote people like us who are already reasonably tech savvy and somewhat up the curve, but it is the expansion of that to industries that earlier would have probably thought, how can you possibly do this online? So education, both higher education as well as grade school, healthcare. Today you can't go to see a doctor, so you have to consult them virtually, remotely. IT services. When I have a company, as Atul mentioned, called CoverFox, in 2 days they rolled out a remote call center operation because they had to. Today we have seen headlines of IT companies saying, 25% of their workforce in the office working 25% of the time can do 100% productivity. So I think some of these are very profound changes that will sustain even after, and I don't want to say sort of after COVID because we don't know what that is, but even after lockdown. I think travel and business travel will change, or maybe I hope it will change, because COVID has done more to positively impact our global carbon footprint than any number of climate conferences could have. But yes, of course, it will have then a negative impact on the airline industry, on the hospitality industry, and so on and so forth. So that's one piece, digitalization. The second piece is an absolute sort of human coming together. The collaboration one has seen between various stakeholders in both economy and society. So between government and industry, between startups and industry, between startups and government, and between government, business, startups, and society. I think a very, very significant dialogue has emerged here. And I've the kind of openness, the receptivity of messaging back and forth, the collaboration. So the number of startups that have stepped up to say, okay, we will use our surplus workforce to supply meals. Corporates getting up to say, okay, we will shift our manufacturing and supply to PPE, to manufacture ventilators. We saw that with Mahindra. We saw Zealingo saying, forget apparel, we are actually going to manufacture masks. Wellspun shifting one of their big supply lines to sort of manufacture masks as well. Then using innovation, and this is a topic dear to my heart and to Avana, using innovation to solve this problem. So the Startup Innovation Challenge, of which I'm a part with Startup India, the ACT versus COVID, if you've seen that the first sort of ICMR accreditation has come to MyLab for rapid testing. So I think there is this positive lining that is emerging of collaboration across stakeholders and participants that may not always actually get on the same platform. I can go on, or I can take a pause. Atul, please guide me here.
Yeah. So thanks for your initial comments. One overwhelming question that has come mean, multiple times from different people is, how do we sustain business during the current phase? That is over next few months or maybe a year. And how important is cash? I mean, while running the business in near term, how much we should be conscious of preserving cash, and for how long? What should be the runway?
So more than ever, cash is king. And you may have revenue and profit on an accrual basis, but if you don't have cash, there is no runway really. So cash is very much king. In the startup world, where in any case, companies work with a sort of a limited cash cushion, the focus has very rapidly shifted to cash containment. Recognize your costs early, work closely with your teams to contain those costs. And of course, you must sort of take care of your statutory liabilities, and there are laws which are now requiring that workforces be maintained, salaries be maintained, and hence it becomes even more important to have collaboration between, say, founders, promoters, owners, and thus shareholders and management of various, whether it is startups or it is large companies. The reality is we came not from sort of 100 kilometers an hour to 50, we went from 100 to 0. And consequently, most of April, actually I think all of April, and a bit of March and maybe a bunch of May will be zero revenue. If you're a consumer company, if you're not in the essentials business, then revenue is zero, costs are as they are. So focus has to be on cash, raising money at whatever price you can, extending, and if you're a lending company, if you're fintech and we have one of those, then working with your lenders and liabilities to extend the moratorium. And actually, I think some of the smarter, better startups are really engaging their teams to repurpose them. This is the time to think about new product development. Engage with the customer, hear the voice of the customer, get the feedback, see what the future can look like. So reimagine the business even if need be. So use this time well, but of course, first you have to survive to then eventually thrive. As they say, jaan hai to jahan hai. So first focus has to be on survival.
So what do your investee companies today tell you? I mean, your direct investee companies or the other friends in the industry that you have running PE and VC funds, one you have right at home. So what is the experience you hear? What are the questions, queries, concerns from other investee companies?
It's actually very similar questions and concerns, which is, but it varies by the industry that company is in. So in anything that is in supply chain has actually seen an increase in demand. So if you're a technology enabled logistics, whether it is hyperlocal or it is long distance end-to-end sort of enterprise logistics, there has been such a shift in demand to anything that is digitally enabled. So if you think about it, right, if I'm large FMCG company, ABC, I will not name, and I'm looking to maintain the continuity of my supply chain and get my goods from factory to wholesaler to kirana to consumer, I would prefer hence to work with a technology enabled platform that actually has full trackability, traceability. So consequently, demand for technology enabled logistics across the value chain has absolutely gone through the roof. Even in our e-kirana innovation hunt and challenge that we have just started with Startup India, we are seeing so many companies, and some of them are actually associated with TIE, that were looking at the kirana to consumer, that whole space, and suddenly the time has come. So on the one hand, so according to the industry, there are opportunities. On the other hand, if they are in consumer businesses, which are non-essentials, then they're actually at a standstill. Lending is a mixed bag. It depends on what segment our companies are lending to. If it is subprime, consumer durable, linked kind of lending, I think those books will be under more stress. Whereas if it is to salaried people, which is near prime or prime, where there is more sort of security of income, those books are likely to stay more robust. But the questions are the same. How do you keep your teams engaged, keep motivation, morale high? How do you continue working when no one can go to the office? And with startups, there is always some innovation that happens and some innovative solution that comes up. When I think India has come out with its first Zoom alternative called Namaste, which we are as a firm going to try out on Monday.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. So is it a funded company recently?
It is a recently funded company, very small, two young guys. We are actually meeting them on Monday, and I will love to share more after that.
Okay.
I don't, if I may, Atul, also want to touch upon the human element of this.
Yes.
So the one big question is around anxiety and stress for employees, as well as for founders. And one piece of advice I'm sharing with anyone who cares to listen is, to perform, you have to be fit, and both physically and mentally fit. So I have founders who are figuring out a way to continue to exercise through this period, even under lockdown, attend yoga, do meditation. And I would never have imagined some of the people who have taken to meditation. I could not have thought that they were the meditation types, and they are actually embracing that to find that inner stillness and strength to go through this.
Since you're talking about human side, is it a good time now to hire some good talent? Because I understand that a lot of good talent is available today.
Absolutely, it's actually seldom a bad time to capture very good talent if it comes your way. And again, within the constraint of where is the business, how much cash runway does it have, and do you have the ability to capture that talent, get innovative, think about sort of equity schemes. Yes, it's absolutely a very good time, particularly tech talent. And we have companies that are looking at that. It's also not a bad time to think about acqui-hiring, frankly.
So is funding available today for those who want, whether it is, and you can look at different stages. There are early stage startups wanting seed funding or angel funding, and then VC funding, P funding. So is this a time when one can raise funds, evaluations fallen, or one should wait?
If there is adequate cash runway and you don't need the money right away, I would recommend waiting till the dust settles and there is a little bit more clarity on where the market is going. That may actually get a better value and a better, even from the entrepreneur's point of view, better understanding of what their business looks like. On the other hand, for very early stage, seed stage, the question is there funding available? Funding is available. While I think the first 2-3 weeks, everyone got very quiet and we were very, very cautious. Now, at least we are starting to look at opportunities again. And I know a number of other funds are as well. This is also a time when there are more bridge rounds that are happening. And some extensions of old funding rounds will also take place.
So we also have Ganesh Natarajan today on the call. And his question is, how do you think the investing environment will change post-COVID? Will startup funding wane, except in only a few areas?
Girish, I wish I had that crystal ball. But if, so I'm going to take a shot, but without the benefit of that crystal ball. The more innovative businesses in segments that will see a shift, positive shift in consumption. So edtech, health tech, even fintech. I'm seeing so much more acceptance of digital payment mechanisms in our traditional ecosystem, and I will come back to that. So plus, virtual meetings, teaming solutions, even enterprise SaaS for that matter. Certain segments, I think there will be funding available. There's enough private capital that is pooled and wanting to invest. And so it will not wait on the sidelines forever. So once the market opens a little bit and economic activity resumes, for the more innovative, in the right segment type of startups, there will be investment available. I think there are obviously certain segments where, if it's particularly travel related, or anything that is to do, say, with particularly sort of energy infrastructure and so on, and it may not necessarily be startup. I think there we will continue to see a more cautious approach to see how the segment is shaping up.
Okay. So, related question from Jinsi. How do you decide on which companies to invest in? And what do you look for? And how do you foresee which companies will scale up?
So we look for companies that are using technology and innovation to, like Atul mentioned earlier, to solve some very large problems, and typically that lead not just to economic returns, which is what we underwrite for, but also large social impact. So it could be livelihood and job creation, could be formalization, market linkages. We are a gender smart fund, so we also look at how we can actually enable gender. So we're not gender lens in the sense we don't just invest in women entrepreneurs, but we like to see the needle move on inclusion in all the businesses that we are associated with. I guess like most fund managers, we will look for an exceptional entrepreneur, and that's where the judgment and the assessment comes in. As well as is there a large enough market opportunity? What is the execution intensity required in this business? So some businesses are much more sort of around the idea and the technology, whereas some require a lot of operational execution. We take a call and we build a model with the entrepreneur on what will be required for scaling up, see where we can help them. And then we actually start engaging with them even before the investment is made.
So how important is disruptive business model in all this?
So we think of disruption actually as innovation. And it could disrupt an old way of doing things, but there are so many companies and businesses that we have seen. Let me take delivery. Delivery logistics is not a new disruptive business per se. Logistics is a very old business, but it's just an innovative way of executing it. Similarly, urban company. So home services, carpentry, plumbing, electrician, beauty services, these are not new disruptive businesses. It's just a technology enabled, very inclusive way of executing that business. So is it disruptive? Yes, it is. Is Ola disruptive? Absolutely. But we've always had taxi cabs. So is it disruption or is it innovation? And similarly, we talk about fintech and lending. Lending ultimately is you have to underwrite credit. It's the business of giving money and then getting it back. So it's a very old as time kind of business. It's just that you're using technology to distribute, i.e. originate, and perhaps using better analytics to be able to underwrite and be able to lend to segments at prices that you otherwise could not have. So that's how we think about disruption and innovation. I think two sides of the same coin.
Right. But of course, as you said, the quality of management is the most critical. Mm-hmm. Because whatever be the idea, whatever be the business model,
right.
But ultimately what matters the most is the management team. Mm-hmm. Correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But difficulties come in every business. Then the point is, how does one handle them? How does one overcome them? Mm-hmm. And how does one scale up and build business? So there's a question from our charter member, Ajay Rajgaria. He says, it's so confusing as to how to value a startup because companies approach with no real barrier to entry, with lakhs in revenue, but asking 10 crore plus valuation. They have some first mover advantage, but nothing else.
So I did not follow that fully.
So question is, how to value a company? So many startups really come and approach asking for high valuation with limited revenue, though they may have been first in that particular segment, but with no entry barrier, more will come in. So how does one value such companies? I guess it's a bit of frustration with startups asking too much valuation.
Or if you're a founder feeling you're not being valued enough. So I think valuation is at that stage of a company such a subjective thing.
Yeah.
So it's unlike public markets where you say, there will be price discovery in the market. Here, there is no price discovery. It's a very subjective judgment call on how big can this business be? How good is the management team? Is this a disruptive technology? Is it too early for the curve, or is it just sort of is the timing right? And can someone, there are sometimes often, there is an early mover advantage, but if a late entrant comes in and out executes, they may go away with the lion's share of the economic pie there.
Well, Anjali, we have been telling TiE also very much to startups that be reasonable in expectations, because this is not new. We often find unreasonable expectations being set by the startup founders. And then they're having difficulty in attracting investors at every stage.
Right.
Or settling with compromising on the quality of investment.
I think that's a real issue, where if money is raised early at a very high valuation, it's a temporary feel good. Because for the next round and the round after, the early investor will want to see an uptick. But if the business has not grown fast enough, and on any metric, whether it could be revenue, could be profitability, and so on, if the business has not developed and progressed enough, they may actually not get an uptick. So one does see a lot of startups getting caught in this valuation trap. So it is quite very prudent to be cautious and conservative, and take the approach of leave enough on the table for your next round of investors also.
Right. And so on fundraising, there is another question from Ganesh Natarajan again. What about floating a convertible debt instrument today, rather than resort to raising money at whatever value one may get in current scenario?
So absolutely, Ganesh, there are, I am seeing a number of bridge rounds right now, where they may have been on the verge of closing an equity round, which got halted or suspended because of this. And so they're saying, let's do a bridge at some X% discount, anywhere between 20 to 40% discount to next round. We are seeing an extension of previous round, so money being raised at the same valuations. And I think if there are supportive investors and they're working collaboratively with the entrepreneur, then there is support. There is opportunity certainly to think about new instruments. And for example, working capital financing. Working capital financing in other parts of the economy is very prevalent. You get a bank loan, you get an NBFC loan. In the startup ecosystem, however, a company has to raise equity to actually finance its working capital. So there is absolutely opportunity to innovate around new products to serve the different type of enterprise financing need.
So from current scenario, let's move further to the future on a post-COVID situation. What do you think are the opportunities for these startups in a post-COVID scenario?
Post-COVID, once I think economic activity resumes normally, and then who knows what normal means, there will be a new normal that will emerge at that time. I think the world is in need of innovation more than ever. The problems, the larger problems of the world, as we can see today, are all being solved by innovation-led companies. And we could not, again, have imagined in January that we would have a session like this on Zoom. And in the last 4 weeks, the number of meetings I've personally, and I'm sure it's the same for everyone here, the number of meetings one has attended, that to even get that group of people together would have taken us 2 weeks to coordinate calendars. And we could very quickly get on meetings virtually, remotely, and be very productive and efficient. So these solutions, whether it is Zoom or it is AirMeet or Namaste, these are all new companies. This all collaboration tools that are seeing Microsoft Teams, Slack. In the EdTech world, I'm seeing not just companies, but even schools. My kid's school has moved to doing Google Classroom. Could not have imagined 3 months ago. So innovation is the way to go. Startups will come up with more solutions for the world's problems, including things like medical equipment, testing. I mean, Arogya Setu is an example. Arogya Setu is an app that was created in 2 weeks flat. And terrific example of startup and government collaboration. So between the Niti Aayog and 1mg and Make My Trip.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. The kind of people we're able to assemble in today's time, we would not have imagined earlier. Today's call itself, we have now in this meeting 258 people. I don't think earlier we could have ever thought of having so many people assembling on a digital platform like this. So obviously, yes, I think we've seen the change already happening, which can only, the pace will only increase. You mentioned about the school that already online education has started. So you think FinTech would have a great future going forward?
Oh, absolutely. And I think FinTech will now tap into segments which thus far was still somewhat cash oriented. So I will give 2 examples. One is a everyday example that I'm pretty sure most people on this group right now, the 250 people we are experiencing in our daily life. So the first sort of providers to stop delivering were really the big tech e-commerce platforms on grocery. So we've all been dependent on our neighborhood, sabji, bhaji, eggs, bread wala, etc., to really keep our daily ration flow going for grocery. In my building society, we moved away from any kind of cash transaction because cash can be a transmitter a few weeks ago, which means all of these people who thus far were used to dealing in cash now have UPI accounts. So they've actually got a UPI and they're accepting UPI, Bheem, Google Pay, bank transfers, Paytm, you name it. So every single vendor, and this is absolutely traditional Bharat as it comes, they are all switching to digital payments. So when that happens at a large enough scale, and I think it is already happening at a large enough scale, Kiranas are moving that way, contactless delivery is happening. So I think FinTech has will continue to have a bright future. And I think new products, and not just payment instruments, but savings, credit, protection and insurance. Demand for insurance and particularly digital insurance is sort of spiking, not on the auto side, obviously, but certainly on health and life. So yes, FinTech has a bright future ahead. New collaboration models. We are in fact working on a model to create a distributed platform for what is called the unorganized, and I choose to call it distributed commerce, following the UPI and PCI model. So open architecture, any provider can plug and play, enable the Kirana, enable the consumer, and enable the entire supply chain. So yes, FinTech, again, logistics, things that play in this Kirana ecosystem, health, education, anything that enables contactless. I think for a period, for a while, as a society and this human psyche, the fear will be there. So we will want to keep the social distancing and sort of minimize contact.
So what type of education companies, say EdTech, you think would have future? What would they be doing?
So let's pick 2 or 3 that are actually sort of homegrown Indian companies that have seen lots of growth, and it's been reported as such. Byju's, Unacademy, Vedantu, all of them working with either on-demand or real-time classrooms. So either self-learning or classrooms, I can see an acceleration really of virtual classrooms take place. Then, and then collaboration platforms between teachers and students, between students themselves. And that can actually lend itself to teaming in the professional context also. So video real-time or video on demand I think all of those things have an opportunity.
So there are more verticals that I have questions on. About, again, same thing, future post-COVID. So I'll name one by one. Consumer products.
Consumer products, sharp divide. Very sharp divide between what is essential. And I just don't mean the government definition of essential, but what people absolutely need every day. So food, so mass scale food, personal care, hygiene care. I think all of those will continue to see demand. In fact, there was a spike in demand briefly when people started buying and hoarding. Things that are discretionary spend, that will depend very much on when the economy comes back and in what shape. And there is a resumption of overall demand. So I think coming out of this, there will be a demand shock. So there will be an impact on growth and thus people's disposable incomes and hence their appetite for discretionary spend.
B2B SaaS platform companies.
Again, I think it depends on the nature of B2B. So I heard from an entrepreneur the other day that this is the best time to be an Indian SaaS company because you can actually get on a virtual meeting remotely and make the sale, and you're not expected to go walk the hall, wine and dine, and play golf. So maybe it's an opportunity, really. And then there are again segments, collaborative workspaces. We are seeing virtual offices develop. I think more and more will get digitized and move online. So there is an opportunity.
Renewables and electric vehicles.
So renewables, if we think about overall demand for energy and power, it again goes back to, it depends how the world will consume. It is entirely possible that for a while we will see a diminished power demand. When I sit on a large power company board, so I will not get too specific about it. But we may see before industry starts kind of 100% production capacity. Renewable energy is definitely the way of the future. But for in the immediate term, 80% of our energy comes from thermal, so that's not going away either. But sort of more direct to consumer type opportunities in rooftop solar, in microgrid, in sort of net metering, digital metering, as well as what we call the prosumer model, where you can produce and consume at the same time. I think those are things that are interesting.
Mm-hmm. What about QSR industry?
So restaurants and dining, on-premise dining, I think it is safe to assume that for at least a while, none of us are flocking back into crowded public spaces. That said, I think we're all going to get tired of our own cooking. So takeout will be I think, a growth industry.
Yes. So maybe same restaurant can offer
Right.
that even fine dining
Right.
and take away. So they can still have revenue, but not have people really being there on a sit-down basis, correct?
Right. And so then it begs the question of the business model. So I think new business models will emerge. So the same restaurant whose vegetable or noodles or pizza we crave, we will order, but we won't go there. So what happens to the real estate? What happens to the serving staff? And on the other hand, they can expand their kitchen. They may even want to repurpose some of their serving staff to becoming delivery staff. I think some of these repurposing of business models will take place.
Right. So in general, there have been a lot of concerns, questions about SME sector in general.
Right.
Now, a few months later, again, further later. So these are the serious concerns that today they are hit very hard, SME sector. The SME could be startup with new technologies, could be digital, or could even be a traditional company, maybe
Right.
trade or any other form of brick and mortar company. And there is a big concern that they don't have enough scale, they don't have enough reserves. How do they go about? I mean, where do you see the future? I mean, ultimately 80% of India's workforce works with SME sector.
Mhm.
So what will happen going forward?
So SME and the self-employed or the self-organized businesses and sectors actually
Yeah,
are the most vulnerable right now.
informal sector, as we call.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So it could be your shopkeeper, your mechanic, could be a small trader. So anything that goes from self-employed to a small business to small manufacturing, and not necessarily technology and innovation and so on. Actually, those are really the most vulnerable segments right now, where particularly for the self-employed people, if they are not able to go out to work, they don't earn. If they don't earn, basically don't eat. MSME in any case was seeing decline in liquidity and the funding, credit funding available. That is probably likely to get worse in the short term. And the flip side of this is MSME and self-employed and our micro entrepreneurs are really the heart and blood of India. That is what makes Bharat. What makes India unique is we have entrepreneurs at every corner and probably 16 entrepreneurs on every street. So it's not top down, it is bottom up. And I think we have seen a few things come from government on SIDBI having a loan, about offering a loan facility and so on. So we hope that actually that does get transmitted into the right quarters.
But while fine, government will do what it can in the near term. But going forward, what will happen? I mean, will they sustain at all? Let's assume government will give some support.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But then what? Would the consumer preferences change? Would the business models change? The ecosystem change in a way that for them survival will become difficult? Because it's said that every crisis time the strong get stronger and the weak gets weaker.
So three things, and again this is gazing through that crystal ball very darkly. There will be digitalization, and we are seeing this now a little bit because of the work being done through Startup India and the e-Kirana. There is an appetite to go up the digital value chain. Thus far, they haven't had an impetus, and they actually haven't had support. So if out of this crisis comes an opportunity to bridge that digital divide between the Bharat and India, that I think can be a very positive outcome. So some will digitize, some will consolidate. So you may not find sort of multiple players in the same segment, and maybe the consolidation that will take place is similar to what happened after GST, where supply chains consolidated. And will there be winners and losers? Absolutely. I think there will be those that will emerge stronger and those that may actually not stay in that business at all. There'll be some that will be forced to restart and go into doing something different. There could be some mortality. So actually those are the worrying things.
So these are the challenging times for SMEs particularly.
Absolutely.
We covered a lot of verticals, but one vertical, there have been a lot of questions. Again, it has just come, Suresh Saluja. Can you please throw some light on health tech?
So I will try. I will take an example. Today, nobody will want to go to a hospital. So chances are we'll first call our doctor and we will do a consultation. Now, typically this healthcare, both from the physician side, and I'm not talking surgery here, but from the physician side as well as the patient side, has been the slowest to adopt technology. Because that human interaction has been such a critical component of care. And today there is no option. So if you want to consult a physician, you'll call them, you'll get on a WhatsApp video, you'll even, maybe do a Zoom call. And at some point, doctors will say, okay, I am actually quite comfortable to consult remotely. So telemedicine that we have been talking about for almost 20 years now, this is the time now for telemedicine. And one is that what I just described, which is very anecdotal between patient and physician, attaching a transaction engine and a payment engine to a consultation. But then it can have a very, very widespread impact on providing access to high quality healthcare and certainly high healthcare advice to remote rural areas, tier 3, tier 4, which have thus far been sort of cut off from this whole digital revolution. So that's my view on health tech. So, but that's just on sort of the physician interface and messaging and transaction. There is also obviously innovation that will emerge around new vaccines, the supply chains for new vaccines, testing methodologies, investment across the world really in investing in PPE, making sure you have stockpiles. There was a discussion we had the other day, just sort of privately, informally, that given that bats are now known to be carriers of viruses, where bats have built antibodies, but those viruses lend themselves to very easy transmission to humans. Why is it that in the last 20 years, there has not been enough research in that? So maybe that is a new field that opens up.
Any other wellness areas, wellness products? We talk so much today about immunity building. People are so curious. So do you see that creating a scope in future for wellness products?
Oh, absolutely. I think I mentioned yoga and meditation for entrepreneurs, but it's yoga and meditation for everybody. And there is a sense that this is nature's revenge on our unbridled, unhealthy consumption of the human species. So while yes, we are already seeing a fitness trend, we are also seeing a lot of shift to online. So Fiternity, for example, has launched a full virtual program online that you would otherwise need to go to your gym for. You can do Zumba online. There are lots of trainers that have actually shifted their classes, quote unquote, online. So is Cure.fit. But beyond that, I would like to very optimistically believe that we will all suddenly become much greener and eat healthier and exercise regularly. I'm not so sure though. I think we will go back to craving our pizzas and pakoras and so
but
on.
To some extent, habits will continue. Awareness. Corona has put fear of life in us. So
yes.
I think.
No, I agree. So jokes apart, I do think that Corona has shown that if you have your only barrier against Corona is a healthier, more resistant immune system. So healthy living will no longer be about just fitness. It will actually be about survival.
Absolutely. I mean, very true. Now, one interesting question has come from Ashok, Miami. Do you think India will go back to a saving society from spending society it had lately become? So are we going to change the spending habit now that we are not spending much? We're not going out, we're spending so less. So do you think habits are going to change for savings?
So India still actually has relative to the rest of the world, a very low level of indebtedness. So will we reverse the trend on consumption that had begun is an interesting question. I think in any case, we were starting to see millennials spend quite differently from the previous generation. So the experiential spend, which is where millennials were spending, those are actually exactly the spaces, so travel and experiences, which are going to see an impact, a negative impact from social distancing and so on. As a society, will we go back to saving more? It is possible. There may be a return to conservatism and much more sort of risk aversion, if you will. But history shows that following depression, following recessions, following health crises, there's actually a big spurt in consumption. And the human psyche wants to feel good and seeks that pleasure of consumption.
But less consumption is not good for the economy.
Which is why I think we need to continue to consume responsibly, nevertheless. eat healthier, spend on fitness. But yes, consumption is required for the economy.
So we're talking about the changing habits and whether post-COVID some habits will continue. So like today, online shopping looks the reality. You think that will continue post-COVID or will go back to traditional way of shopping? Same way, would we go to salons and spas, or we would use services of company like urban urban companies written, but whatever the correct name.
Urban Company is the new name.
Okay, urban company. That's the new name. Okay,
That's
okay,
right. That's right.
that's correct. Okay.
So that's actually a fascinating debate. So on the one hand, our online commerce has seldom gone beyond 10% of total retail in most economies, and some of the, China, for example, leads the world in that. So will this accelerate the shift to online commerce? It is quite likely that it will. But yet the touch and feel and the experiential aspect of consumption, whether it is shopping or eating at a restaurant or going to a movie theater and so on, I think some of that will come back, some of that will not come back. And these were trends that were already in place. So it is possible that, actually not possible, it is likely that these trends will accelerate. So yes, certainly online commerce, I can see it accelerating further. Online consumption itself will accelerate of everything, whether it is media. I mean, the first thing we all stopped were our newspapers. And then newspapers stopped printing themselves. So again, big shift and breaking of the value chain. So the only focus then becomes on the content creation and digital delivery versus the sourcing of the paper, the large printing presses, the delivery of the physical delivery of it, and so on. So yeah, I do see a shift to online.
You initially in your remarks and several times later, you did talk of digitization. And if that is going to be the reality, what other technology trends do you see in that, in the digitization? Do you think that it would be end-to-end digitization in each company, right from supply chain onwards, and would be all-encompassing? How important that would be? And vertical-wise, you think this will be across all verticals or more in particular verticals like say fintech or some important areas? What do you think?
So digitalization is a trend which, in my view, is a horizontal. It is all across an enterprise of any size, whether it is a startup or a large company. And at its core, it is all about technology enablement, better data, better business intelligence, better decision making. And whether it is in sort of, what used to be CRM, today it is AI-led consumer insighting. So every 10 years, there is new nomenclature and new technology, but at the heart of it is having more data, more trackability, traceability for more efficient business. I'm seeing two interesting trends actually, particularly on supply chain. One is the digitalization of the entire supply chain is now here. And I think it will accelerate to the point of knowing exactly where what is at what time, being able to forecast demand, manage your inventory better, know where your goods are, if it is physical goods. On the other hand, given that we have seen with shutdown of borders, the closure of factories or the suspension of manufacturing, what the trend we have seen over the last 30, 40 years of globalization of supply chains, the just-in-time, very, very lean inventory management, that is now being rethought. Now, I'm not saying it will shift back to saying everything is onshore and everything is near shore, but certainly there are discussions around how do we de-risk our supply chain from any one geography. Certainly China is the one that everyone talks about. But even say, if it's a critical component and it is only manufactured in one factory or two factories around the world, and suddenly there is no movement of freight, then should you actually then really diversify the manufacturing footprint of critical components? Do you bring it onshore? Do you keep more inventory? What does that mean for working capital? Who takes the cost? Does the company take the cost and thus eat into margin or pass it on to the customer? What will the market bear? So I think there's lots of very interesting things that will emerge and some changes that we will see both in human and corporate behavior.
You think the trends will differ from country to country? In India, since digitalization has been less compared to some Western countries, you think the potential is even more here?
I think there's more headroom here. So we have lots more space to grow. So yes, there will be more, I think a more rapid adoption just because we are a little bit further behind on the curve.
And that would create great opportunities for technology companies as well.
Absolutely.
Both service providers and the product companies.
That's right. I think localization is very much a theme and a trend. So creating solutions that are very, very relevant to Bharat, because that is still where the bulk of our society and our economy lives. It could be in agri, it could be in agri supply chain. It could actually, again, I've talked about this whole grocery and kirana before, could be in traditional savings. When the entire gamut of microfinance has been very much on the ground and very, very physical contact based. So will this, I hope this accelerates the digitalization of microfinance, which actually reaches both savings and credit instruments to absolutely the last mile and the bottom of the pyramid in our country. So I think there's lots of headroom for us to digitalize.
So there's a question from Anurag Madan from Trend Oil. And he's saying we are into women ethnic fashion wear. Can you please throw some light on apparel and fashion industry? Would it be shifting towards e-commerce?
Isn't it already shifting towards e-commerce? Although right now all of it is somewhat halted because it is not on the essentials list. The same combination of online and offline. So it's actually shifting to omni-channel, whether it is apparel or footwear and so on and so forth. So it's the consumer wants to be able to access the product anywhere, anytime. They may not just transact online. They may still want to go to a store and experience it. But the way to engage, to hook, to inform is very much online. So I think it is omni-channel. It is not a simple question of online or offline.
Okay, so I'll come to last two questions. Now, one is legal tech industry. And the question is from Aman Sanghvi, and he says there have been a lot of resistance from investors to investing in legal tech startups. But now that courts are shut and the in-person hearings have moved to virtual hearings, do you think there is greater potential for legal tech industry? What's your take from investment perspective? Do you see huge scope here?
So we don't really look at the legal space as a investment target segment for us. So I don't particularly have an informed view other than that as a user of legal services. So much like I spoke about health tech, where the consultation with the physician is now getting remotely technologically enabled, something similar will happen with the legal space as well. What happens with the courts, and do courts start hearing online? I think only time can tell, and I actually don't have a particular view on that. We should ask one of our legal eagles next time to comment on whether courts will move online. That will be a real innovation.
Well, that will speed up the cases. You know, today
absolutely
we have such huge backlog. Maybe that can transform the whole situation. It's an opportunity. Anjali, you have been closely linked with Niti Aayog and the government. How do you see digitalization taking place at government level and at policy level? How do you see government impacting the social habits in terms of digitalization?
So the last 4 weeks, the government offices in Delhi resumed last week when people went back. Otherwise, all government meetings were, not all actually, most government meetings were happening online. And in a very similar way to the way businesses are being run, on Zoom, and then moving on to sort of more secure platforms and so and similarly. And the acceptance, the understanding and acceptance of technology is remarkable. So the government I have seen being so supportive of and working very closely with the startup ecosystem on finding technology-led, innovation-led models to solve, whether it is again supply chain, it is payments, it is access, creation of new models of sort of PPE. MyLab, for example, starting to do these rapid testing kits through ICMR. So a lot has happened virtually, remotely. So government is very supportive of digitization in general.
What is the future of co-working industry, which is growing so well? Question from Sudhanshu Rastogi.
The premise for co-working is that you have shared infrastructure, which thus is more cost effective. That premise remains. But with social distancing, the need for office space itself will reduce. So if more people, and work from home, we have now seen work from home is actually quite effective. So if that becomes the norm, not everyone needs to be in the office all the time, then the overall demand for office space will be impacted. And so repurposing, just like we are thinking about repurposing our teams and our supply chains, I think office spaces will also have to get repurposed. The big challenge in India, of course, is not everyone has a home or a space at home where if there are 4 people in the family and they all have to work from home, they may not have adequate space or adequate sort of telecom infrastructure to support that work from home.
Absolutely. Now, my last question is on startup industry in general. Now, at TiE, we really debate internally and we get so many questions from startups showing concern about startup industry in general. How do we see the future of startups in India post all these developments? I mean, many would have become weaker in terms of cash flow and reserves, and even in terms of valuation. So we have 60,000 startups across India. How do you see the future of these startups?
I'm tempted to say the future is bright for startups. A lot of answers to our problems are going to come from startups. So I'm very inclined to say the future is bright, but as we all know, it is not similarly bright for all 60,000, but that's the nature of entrepreneurship. It's not a sure thing. So if there are people thinking about startup and so on, I would still say go out and back yourself. Take the bet on yourself.
So in today's time, if someone has less cash, so would you say preserve the cash if you need to lock the doors and reopen after situation turns normal so that you are back in business instead of burning away the money?
Oh, absolutely. Today, you must conserve every rupee you have because we don't know when the cycle will start turning again. I mean, the engine has really, like I said, gone from sort of 100 to 0. So you must conserve your fuel. And it is idling right now. So 0 would be when you could actually shut it down, but you still have to keep it idling. So conserve every rupee. And if you can, raise more. Keep the cash.
So Anjali, on that positive note, that future of startups is bright, and there will be work for platform like TiE in future. So if startups exist, organization like TIE will exist. And so with this bright future for them, I would like to thank you. I would like to thank all the participants. And I must add, as is said, where angels fear to tread, Anjali, you have been willing to take up that challenge and answer everything. It's not an easy task, but that only shows your deep knowledge of the subject and your sharp intellect. Thanks very much.
Thank you all so very much for being with me and Natul and Tyre today. Really appreciate it. And I would like to say, the fine print E and OE, errors and omissions accepted. So forgive me any lapses here, and delighted to be together. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you all for joining us today. As you know, we've got a very, very packed week coming up. So I'm just going to be sharing with you all the other stuff which is coming up. So very interesting sessions. As always, Sunday is our retail session. We have the great BS Nagesh coming in, who was the early founder of Shopify. We are doing a session on the human side of retail industry this Sunday. We're also having a very, very interesting Q&A with Mr. Mohandas Pai on I think it should be Monday. I think the date is wrong on the deck. I will have it changed. We also have a session where we're starting off the masterclass in sales, which most of you know. And we've got your one-on-one mentorings going on with Peachtree Advisors, so please apply for them. And we have Ganesh Natarajan and Dev Bhattacharya doing a session on new business models emerging post-COVID, which is taking place on Wednesday. Our legal session on Thursday is as per schedule, and this time it's going to be about startups who are interested and thinking about flipping their point of origin. There are going to be discussions on that this Thursday. We have another mentoring session, which is the Mumbai Business Camp, the Thai Mumbai Business Camp on Thursday, which happens parallelly. A seminar with the Next Retail, which is going to happen on the Sunday following that. We also have the angel session, which is going to take place on Sunday with Venture Catalyst and 100x VC. Many angel investors are going to be coming, and shortlisting for that has already started. Apart from this, we've got 2-3 more things which are currently being developed in the background. So keep a watch out and look out, and we will kind of look forward to having you all for everything. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. See you soon. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Anjali. Thank you, Atul Bhai.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
I'm unable to leave. You have to kick me out.
It's the bottom right hand.
Yeah.